Ukrainian armed forces have taken 2 more towns in Kursk in their Kursk invasion, while in the west, in the Glushkovo pocket, according to Russian reports, they have destroyed the bridges that connect Tyotkino with the rest of the pocket, and thus creating more or less a bite-sized chunk that should be taken fairly soon, at least if we believe the Russians. While those are obviously good news, we have some bad news as well. The first F-16 is confirmed to be lost already, and in the Donbass the Russians keep advancing, but we'll talk about this and anything else we have about the war in Ukraine in this situation report. Now, I mentioned in the past that I did a donation campaign for fire engines just to those who participated while I was focusing on it with my German channel. Some of you participated, thank you very much, and 2 of them have been bought and are on their way to Nikopol right now. As you can see, they have been equipped with jammers against FPV drones, as the Russians have in the past struck fire engines with FPV drones, so hopefully they will be available for longer. The Ukrainian strikes against the oil infrastructure continue. This time the Ukrainians claim that they attacked an oil depot in Kirov, which would be 1,200 kilometers away, showing a new distance of strikes against the oil infrastructure and showing how far the Ukrainians by now strike into Russia. Basically daily we have reports about new attacks on oil depots and on refineries, so it doesn't seem to make too much sense anymore to mention every single one, but the campaign by the Ukrainians continues, and while it's not successful every time, it is successful quite a lot of times. But there are bad news as well. The first F-16 has crashed and the pilot who was flying it has died with it. The pilot before is reported to have shot down 3 cruise missiles and a Shahid drone. Right now, the cause for that is unclear. What made him lose his life and what made the plane crash. By now, it's basically the discussion is open. We don't have details yet. There were some claims about friendly fire from a Patriot battery. There were claims that that it might be pilot error or technical error. We have videos here, for instance. This shows a Ukrainian MiG-29 shooting down a Shahid drone with an R-37, and as you can see, the distance is fairly close and he flies really close by it. So if the Shahid was flying fairly low and the pilot would have struck the debris from a shoot down, if it was similar, he might have crashed because of that and thus was not able to communicate with the ground station and was not able to eject. But as said, as of now, it's all speculation. The only thing we do know is that the first one is lost and that the pilot is lost with it. And this is the real loss for the Ukrainians. Planes can be replaced, especially as the F-16 is still under production. And at some point, even the US might deliver some of them. But he was one of only 6 pilots that had finished the training, and he's already lost in this attack. The Russians have struck today, again, Ukraine, and in Kharkiv, a glide bomb hit a apartment complex. At least 5 people have died so far, among them a child. Over 20 have been wounded, according to latest reports. So the Russians keep striking back, showing the importance of the Ukrainians to be able to strike Russian bombers, to strike Russian weapons. We switch to the Kursk region, to the developments along the front line, and here is Tyotkino down here, and according to a Russian mill blogger, we have the report Tyotkino has been cut off. There are no crossings or bridges. Now, Tyotkino, as you can see here, barely is basically separated by rivers from the rest of the pocket. If we zoom in, we see that there is at least a bridge here and at least another bridge here and another one here. And according to these Russian mill bloggers, it would be cut off. This is one of the bigger channels with over 1 million subscribers. Other mill bloggers are writing it's unconfirmed. They don't openly doubt it, but they say it's not confirmed yet. If it turns out to be true, then obviously they down here would be even more difficult to supply them, as the Russians would have to bring pontoon bridges over the pontoon bridges to move them further south, even closer to the Ukrainian lines. So this would make it likely that the Tyotkino pocket would fall significantly earlier than the Glushkovo pocket. But this is not all. The front lines are changing as well. Now, first we have the Russians advancing in eastern Koronevo, in the town of Koronevo. I think this is the town and this is the city. We have a geolocation of them being here. Now, a week ago, roughly, I showed you a Ukrainian column driving along this road and being struck from a distance, probably with ATGMs from a helicopter. We now see that the Russians are there. So the Russians have probably taken back the eastern town of Koronevo. Roughly this should be back in Russian hands, more or less, at this point. But while the Russians were somewhat successful at Koronevo, they are still reporting about additional Ukrainian attacks, that the Ukrainians still try to reach Koronevo and reach the road to Rilsk. But so far, I cannot confirm successes here. But we do have successes that we can confirm. The Ukrainians are now geolocated in Nishnaya Parovaya. Now, this is interesting because Nishnaya Parovaya is northeast of Ruskoye Perechnoye. It's up here. And this is the area where in the last situation report, I told you here that the Russians have said they have retaken those towns. And I mentioned that I've never seen the Ukrainians, even any claims that the Ukrainians were in this town. This would mean that by now we have actual geolocations. So now the Ukrainians have taken the town. Now they are in the town here. And the front line should probably be along the river here. They have advanced in this area. They have advanced and they are moving somewhat to the west as well. These are Nishnaya Parovaya, yes, and the other town of Nechayev. To the west here, the Ukrainians are also operating, but this is within the area where they have recently operated, so no advance in this direction as well. Russian mill bloggers at the same time are saying the Ukrainian increasingly move over to the defensive, but the next day then they are reporting a significant amount of attacks again. The fact remains that we barely see any additional advances. Now we have 2 towns in Ukrainian hands, but this has been the first capture of any towns for a week, I think, at least 5 days. It seems like the Ukrainian offensive is actually reaching its culmination point, and the reports are saying the Ukrainians are digging in. So we probably should not await too much more movement unless the Ukrainians commit more reserves. To the east of it, in the Kharkiv area, we have reports by the Ukrainians that the amount of attacks that are being done here in the Kharkiv region are being reduced. The amount of attacks are now, they used to be up to 10 attacks per day. Now it might be 1 or 2. So a reduction of up to 90% since the Kursk offensive. We talked in the past, we spoke in the past about that the Russians mostly sent troops here from the Kharkiv region to confront the Ukrainians in Kursk. And at least here we have an improvement of the situation for the Ukrainians. The Russians are also, the Ukrainians are also saying that there is now little armored vehicles and they mostly do the assaults on foot, using motorcycles and buggies, obviously showing that the majority of the heavy weaponry was moved to Kursk in this region. So Kharkiv should not be much of a threat on the ground anymore, at least for now. On the Eastern Front, we have the Russians actually apparently taking Sinkivka. Now, Sinkivka has been fought over for probably over a year. We have a geolocation of the Russians raising the flag in the center of the town. Now, this is most of the town here, as you can see. It's basically 3 more or less parallel roads, and the Russians have reached the center of it. Here, in the past, we've seen countless attacks going down these roads here, especially in winter, for instance. We've seen a lot of, in this area here, a lot of Russian tanks and IFVs being destroyed by mines and by anti-tank weapons. Now they have reached the center here. Whether the whole town has fallen to the Russians as of now is unclear, but it seems likely that the front line is probably somewhere this here now. Not important, not a massive change, but obviously a change where the Russians have tried to move forward for quite some time, and now they have been successful. Here at Piszczane, we have another Russian advance. The Russians have moved towards the northwest of Piszczane. Here, they've taken roughly this area here. This is getting more dangerous because they're coming closer to the Oskil River. only 6 kilometers away from it now, and thus threatening to cut the lines of supplies, to cut the lines of communication along the front line by reaching the Oskil River, especially should they reach the roads here. This will worsen the supply and communications along the front line here. That's it north of the Seversky Donetsk. To the south of it, we have reports about additional fighting in Bilohorivka, but we have one change in Ivano-Darivka, and here the Ukrainians managed to advance south along that road here, and we have gains by the Ukrainians being confirmed like this. You see right south of Ivano-Darivka, the Ukrainians managed to push down the tree lines here and push the Russians away a little again. Ivano-Darivka is again solidly in Ukrainian hands as of now. To the west of it, I do not have any change, especially Chasiv Yar, Klishivka, and Andrivka. But in the Toretsk region, we have the Russians advancing, and we have to say that more or less Druzhba is about to fall. The Russians have reached this here, and from my understanding, this is the rest of Druzhba. The Russians have now reached these houses here. They have advanced throughout all of Druzhba as by now, and gained additional ground here. Druzhba is about to fall. The last houses are probably still in Ukrainian hands, but the majority of the town is now in Russian hands. The Ukrainians also lost the southern area in Toretsk. Here the Russians now solidified their control over the forested area and managed to advance in the western direction here, south of the high rises, where they have already established themselves like a week ago. They managed to advance further and reach the next high rises in Toretsk. The house-to-house fighting in Toretsk is intensifying and is moving further closer to the center of it. To the west of it, no change that I can confirm, and still no real solution, no real information what is about this area here. So I'm not wasting our time to talk more about it. The Russians managed to push themselves somewhat forwards towards Pantelomainovka. Mainuivka, I think. Pantelaimonivka, that's it. They managed to push forward here. I think this region roughly fell into Russian hands now. They are widening their entrance into the Ukrainian lines and are extending it towards their flanks as well. Not much of a surprise here, and the Ukrainians are getting under pressure from the east now, while initially they were only under pressure from the south. Then further to the west, in Avdiivka, we have the Russians now in Herodivka here, and they gained additional ground in here. We see them on the eastern part of the town already. This is here, more or less. Herodivka is one of the biggest settlements on the way of the Russians when it comes to the 00532 and towards Pokrovsk. The Russians managed to gain additional ground here. They also have now reached the northern part of Novorodivka here. This means that the town is now mostly in Russian hands. I've seen even Ukrainians admitting that the town has fallen completely. So whether or not in the northern part here are still Ukrainians, I cannot say, I cannot confirm, but the majority of the town is in Russian hands, and we must expect that the rest of it will fall soon, as the Ukrainians apparently have withdrawn from parts of it over the last few days. To the south, the Russians have reached the center of Mikhailivka. They gained additional ground in the eastern area here, where they've managed to gain additional houses, where they managed to gain control over additional houses. We have a geolocation of this as well, where they have been inside of Mikhailivka. Here they advanced from the north and have taken this, and to the east they have reached the west and the east of Kharkivka. We see them here in the east. This is Kharkivka, and here they are in the west. And if we look on the map, we see one is here, but the other one is here. So we see the Russians are advancing down towards this direction, and they are advancing from over here. So Kharkivka will probably fall within a very short time as well, because it's being pushed from the sides, and obviously the possibilities for the Ukrainians to defend in the south are somewhat limited, and if they focus too much on Kharkivka, they might be cut off. So I would expect a withdrawal from the Ukrainians from Kharkivka to the south fairly soon. To the south of it, I have no changes until we reach the area of Pobieda. Here, the Russians have advanced somewhat to the west of it. Not a significant change. We now see them here in the tree line to the west of it. Yeah, they gained an additional tree line. Not great, but not a major change that has happened here. But north of Novomikhailivka, they advance in this area here. In this here, they have advanced up until here. That was more or less to be expected. But what is more important, that we have the Russians inside here now as well. We have a geolocation in this should be the Dachas area of the town of Konstantinivka. This is probably has fallen to the Russians as well now. So far, the geolocations have only been roughly here and here. So theoretically, in the northwest, there might be still some Ukrainians, but the majority of the towns has probably fallen. So the front line will likely move probably to this really soon on most of the maps. To the south of it, in the direction of Vuhledar, the Russians keep up the pressure. They have also advanced to the east of Vuhledar. They gained the tree line here. This tree line has now fallen into Russian hands, and to the south of Vuhledar, here at Pavlivka, the Russians gained the tree lines to the west of it. Roughly this area was still south of the river, was still under Ukrainian control until recently. Now they have taken this area as well. The battle for Vuhledar will start fairly soon, as the Ukrainians are now being cut off from their line of communication to the east. They can still supply and communicate towards the north, but to the east, it's now cut off, and Vodiane is the only settlement that is protecting the flank of it as of now. We have no changes to the west of it. We have an interesting video, though, from Riba. Riba is the pro-Russian mill bloggers, and they have a video here indicating what they expect, what the Ukrainians might do. This is kind of interesting, because you see they think that there might be landing operations on the Spits here on the southern side of the Dnipro in Kherson. We see them attacking from the east, and then Ukrainians doing further landing, trying to cut the supply lines. This doesn't mean that it's going to happen. But we see that the pro-Russian propagandists, mill blogger, however you want to call them, are not discounting the Ukrainians yet. The Ukrainians have reserves that they have where they've shown discipline not to commit it as of yet. Other mill bloggers are concerned about the advance towards Pokrovsk, saying that there are at least 5 Ukrainian brigades with well-trained soldiers and good equipment still in reserve, still not being committed, basically saying that this is far from over. The Ukrainians have a lot of fight in them left. Whether it's realistic that the Ukrainians might land on here, I'm highly doubtful. I do not see the huge advantage, especially landing on here, where there's a small area, a small isthmus that can be cut off. A lot of this here is swamp area. I guess they could take it, but then they would be pummeled with artillery, and it would be a repeat of Krinky. Whether that's worth it or not, while the supply lines are being endangered here, I'll leave it up to you, but I'm doubtful that this will actually happen. If we go to the overall situation, we have the Financial Times now confirming what we talked about a couple of times already, that the US are actively preventing Ukraine from using the weapons of longer range of Western partners, even if those partners have already given permission. Basically, the US are threatening Ukraine that they are not allowed to use Storm Shadows, even though the Brits have said that it's fine. They do not allow it because they think that this will lead to some unfortunate developments, either when it comes in regards of escalation or when it comes to a potential rapprochement in the future. In a partisan sabotage area, we have something that might still be an accident, but that might also be, it's fresh from this morning, in a German defense company. I think it was in Cologne. An explosion has happened, and at least 2 employees have been injured heavily, are gravely injured, and have been evacuated. And this happened in Germany at Diehl Defense. Diehl Defense is the producer of Iris-T. So Whether that's a connection, whether that was just an accident, or whether it was sabotage, it's obviously too early, but it's at least there's a possibility of this happening. Then we go to troop generations and developments. Here we have Russian mill bloggers being confirmed that the constant loss of reconnaissance aircraft will mean a significant reduction in the impact of this advantage in the battlefield. The Ukrainians have recently published a compilation of videos where they take down reconnaissance drones with FPV drones, showing that they get quite proficient in this as of now. And now the Russian mill bloggers are taking notice and say, if the Ukrainians continue doing this and are getting better, it's going to be difficult for us to have the reconnaissance. And this would obviously be a massive improvement for the Ukrainians should they be able to take out Russia's reconnaissance drones, because those drones are generally too small to use big air defense systems against, not only because they might not even fuse because the target is too small, and also for the reason that the price difference is so drastic that Ukraine simply can't afford using an expensive missile against a small drone. So those drones mostly operate more or less unimpeded and thus give the Russians an advantage in reconnaissance. Then we have the advisor of the Presidential Bureau in Ukraine, and he said in an interview that the new Sapsan missile has a reach of 600 to 700 kilometers. Now, this is now a Ukrainian claim. Obviously, we have no confirmations. Just to remind you, the Ukrainians said we tested a new ballistic missile that can reach Moscow, and basically that's it with the information. They do not officially say range, they do not officially say size, they do not say warhead size. Most was assumed to be somewhere 600 to 1,000 kilometers. Most was assumed that it's 490 kilograms of warhead, so roughly 1,000 pounds. Now we have the advisor of the Presidential Bureau saying 600 to 700. Whether that's an exaggeration or whether it's downplaying the actual size or whether it's close to the truth, we simply have no idea. In the political sphere, we have more information from banks, international banks, more news that in Kyrgyzstan and the United Arab Emirates, more banks stop working with Russian banks, clearly being afraid of US sanctions against them if they continue operating within Russia. So far, it doesn't seem to cripple the Russians yet, but if it continues, it might cause problems in the future. And the next deputy defense minister in Russia, General Pavel Popov, has been arrested for corruption. I've lost track, to be honest, how many deputy defense ministers are now imprisoned. These are basically all those that have been deputy defense minister under Shoigu. He has been, you could argue, promoted to the head of the Security Council, and everyone he relied upon is in prison now, I guess, or most of them. I guess that's some sign from Putin towards Shoigu as well in this context. And then Riba is writing that two Colombian citizens have been arrested in Caracas in Venezuela and have been extradited to Russia for being mercenaries, and Russia wants to put them in front of courts and imprison them. So they wanted to go home to Colombia, and Venezuela arrested them. Now, just to remind you, by international law, by the Geneva Convention, Riba and the Russians might call them mercenaries, but they aren't. If you check the Geneva Convention yourself, it's a so-called end condition. So to be a mercenary, everything of the conditions must have been fulfilled. And as long as some of them are not fulfilled, somebody is not a mercenary. And while you might argue that they might have fought for money, the fact remains that they were a regular soldier in the regular armed forces, and thus alone, as long as they don't get paid more than other soldiers, and there are no reports of this happening, that foreigners get paid more than Ukrainian soldiers, as long as this is not happening, they are legally not mercenaries. So Russia wants to punish soldiers for fighting, and which would obviously be against the Geneva Convention and thus a war crime. And from the US, the reports is coming that the 155 millimeter production in shells, the 155 shell production, is reaching 80,000 a month. 100,000 a month is aimed for next summer. Obviously, though, while that is good news, which would mean 1 million a year is being reached in the US alone, not all those shells are meant for Ukraine. The US will want to reestablish their own depots, refill them. They have customers, international ones, but there will be still some that they can give to Ukraine as well. So the international production is ramping up. But that was it from me already for now. If you like this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment in the comment section what you think about what's currently happening. And my cat is distracting me because she's destroying the furniture by scratching it. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. We are closing in on 100,000, and it would be awesome if you would be part of those 100,000, if you would help me reach this milestone for this channel. If you want to support this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you, then you can do so by the means in the description. And at this point, I want to thank those again who have donated books. So at this point, I want to thank Adam Ruth for When the Stakes Are High, Deterrence and Conflict Among Major Powers from Vesna Danilovic, he sent me this book. And I want to thank Dr. Gabriel Pittman once again for another book, U.S. Navy Attack Aircraft 1920 to 2020 by Norman Friedman. Anyone concerned with naval affairs knows the name Norman Friedman, so thank you for helping me fill my library in this regard. And Dr. Gabriel Pittman as well donated L.J. Ventas, El Salvador, the book about the war, the Dance of the Death Squads. Thank you very much for this donation as well. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. There's also my Amazon wish list if you want to keep helping me fill up my library. It's getting really nice. It's getting filled up thanks to all of you. And as said, there are various ways to support the channel if you want to. Thank you so much to everyone already supporting this channel. This wouldn't be possible without you to help me run this channel. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.